Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, the stories you share matter because they impact the way people perceive you and your own perceptions of yourself. If you're curious about learning more about storytelling, particularly if you're interviewing, remember my job interview storytelling course is available on Udemy, and you can find the link at elkinsconsulting.com. Today's guest is my friend Sally Magee, introduced to me from my very awesome sister, Karen Elkins Cohen. And we actually recorded an episode earlier in 2024, and somehow I misplaced that recording. So for all of the graciousness that Sally has offered me, we are re-recording this episode, and I couldn't be more grateful. Sally, welcome to the show.
Sarah, thank you for having me again.
It was so embarrassing to me because I am usually pretty on top of things like this, and it just slipped through. And, you know, there's one thing that has happened since 2020 and the pandemic is that I find that I give myself and other people more grace for things like this than I used to. And I think it's the fact that we have not been able to, where am I going with this? We haven't been able to separate our personal and professional lives in the same way as we did pre-2020. And now I see so much of personal experience impacting professional experience. And it always has. But now it's really very clear to me, even more so than in the past, that we can't separate those two, not if we're going to bring our best self to both. So that said, what I would love to begin with is I would love to ask you to share something about yourself that most people don't know about you. Maybe something that's not on your LinkedIn profile or your bio. And I like to ask this question at the beginning because it gives people context for what they're about to hear. I really don't love that so many people have a tendency to anchor someone in time based on one interaction, and they don't understand that people are complicated and multidimensional. So asking this question helps the listeners understand that multidimension of the human that they're listening to.
Oh, that's such a great question. Something that most people don't know about me, but, well, you would be able to see this about me if you read deeply into my LinkedIn profile. But it goes way back, and you probably wouldn't have noticed it. But I was in the Peace Corps. I served in Honduras, and I was a water resources engineer. I served from 2002 to 2004. And many people don't know this about me. I get asked very randomly on occasion, but most people don't know this about me. And like I said, it is on my LinkedIn profile, but you'd have to go pretty deep to find it.
Wow. I'm always impressed with people who served in the Peace Corps because people have such different experiences depending on where they were, who they were with, what their jobs were. There's nothing that you can commonly say, oh, this is a Peace Corps experience. So did you speak fluent Spanish when you got there, before you got there?
No, my language skills were, I would say, basic at best, with speaking Spanish, very basic. One of the amazing things that the Peace Corps does is when you first arrive in country, you are living with a host family who doesn't speak English. So for 3 months, you go through a pretty formal training element to your first 3 months of service. You live with a host family. They don't speak English. And if they do, as I learned the hard way, they're not allowed to speak it to you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they have rules for their host families that they are really just not allowed to break that rule of speaking in your native language. Everything was in Spanish. So for 3 months of training, by the end of the 3 months, I got to the minimum level that is considered passing, which was like intermediate medium. There were grades for the different levels that you could get to. And so I made it to that far, and then certainly learned a whole lot more once I was set off on my own and was able to live in my site and do my job, so to speak.
Do you remember any silly experience you had with the language barrier? Because I think about, I was in Australia studying abroad, and they supposedly speak English down there. But
Right.
there were a couple of things that I didn't know the meaning of certain words, like uh, rooting. So in the US, you root for a team, right? That means that you're a
Right.
big fan and you rah, rah, rah. Well, in Australia, to root is to have sex. When I mentioned one of my friends in college who was a big fan of the Denver the Broncos, and she would go to the games and root for the team, and one of the women in the group said, "The whole team?" So there were a few of those little. I look back, this was the 30 years ago, and I still remember a couple of these, more than 30 years ago. I still remember a couple of these funny language barriers. So, do you have anything like that where something funny happened?
The only one that really comes to mind as you shared that story, it's not nearly as entertaining as yours, um, is my host father was trying to teach me the difference between, in English, it would be nice to meet you, which is mucho gusto, or in Spanish, or nice to meet you, or I like it a lot, which is me gusta mucho. So it's a lot of the same words. But like at dinner one night, I was eating what had been served. And I was like, I guess they asked me if I liked it. And I was like, yes, mucho gusto. Sí, mucho gusto. And they're like, no, 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 no. Mucho gusto means nice to meet you. And he didn't say that in English, but he said, no, no, no. And he like stood up and shook my hand, mucho gusto, to teach me like this is
Oh,
what nice to meet you sounds like. And it was a very it's somewhat nuanced, I guess. Just the words were almost the same, and they just
right.
definitely did not translate the same.
That's so cool that he gave you such a physical, memorable
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
visual representation of what that meant. So you'd
Yeah.
never forget it.
Yeah, to this day. I mean, it's one of the stories that comes to mind. Yeah.
Ah, I love that. That's so cool. And it says, so, I'm always saying that the stories you share tell a lot about who you are, and that the stories you tell about other people say even more about
Mm-hmm.
who you are. And the way you described this man just put a vision in my head of somebody so thoughtful and kind that he would come up with this idea about how to gently give you a really good reference point for what this meant. I can't imagine he was thinking, oh, this is going to really help her. It was, oh, this is what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. He
I
just did
love
it so
that.
naturally and so just with so much kindness that he was genuinely trying to teach me the difference. And that was their job, I mean, so to speak, as the host family. You're living in their house, they give you food and shelter. But their job
Yeah.
is to teach you the language, what you don't learn in classes during the day. Your job is they help you do your homework and really as you are learning a foreign language, it's total immersion. And he just had a
Well,
very
just,
gentle, kind way of doing it.
and the way you told that story demonstrated that. You didn't even
Mm-hmm.
have to say, I picked that up when you just described what he did. You
Uh-huh.
didn't use the words gentle and
Yeah.
kind. But that's what I picked
Mm-hmm.
up that, I love it when a story just demonstrates exactly what I've been talking about for so many years. Like, that's exactly right. That's the best story to share. If you want to talk about who this man is, telling that story demonstrates all of that kindness and thoughtfulness. I love that. So I'm not going to let this go. You mentioned that you learned the hard way. Did they get into trouble for speaking English to you? Were they trying to practice their English?
Oh, I remember one of the kids in the family either spoke English or was like maybe learned English was learning. He was like a high school student. And I caught him like singing an English song. And I was like, you speak English. And he just like, he shut down. And he was listening to like rock music. I don't know what song it was, but he was listening to definitely English, American music. And I kind of picked up on he's like sang it perfectly. And
The
clearly he
gig's up.
was, yeah, I was like, all right, there's some English going on in his family. But no, they weren't allowed to speak English to us, even if he admitted it to me. But it was just kind of a funny thing, like listening to him singing. I was like, oh, I've caught on to something here. It's kind of funny.
So what you meant by you learned the hard way is that you didn't know that that was really the rule, that they couldn't do it.
Yeah, I guess not. Maybe that was part of the message I was trying to convey. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
It's kind of
I
funny.
love it. Are you in touch with them at all? Or did you stay in touch over the years?
No,
That Belle?
I've stayed loosely in touch with one of the women. She actually ran the laundromat in my town,
Mhm.
because I would go to drop off, to have them do clothes, wash clothes.
Right.
And they had a laundromat service where she would like take the clothes into her house and do everything like for you. Um, which was very much needed and appreciated. But I got to be kind of friendly with her such that she was helping me with my Spanish, and she almost like almost like a tutor to me. So I would go
Nice.
in and like while the clothes were being washed, we would do some lessons. And she's reached out to me on LinkedIn, and so we,
Wow.
like I said, kind of loosely have kept in touch. And this was, gosh, Sarah, 20 years ago that I was in the Peace Corps. So
Right.
yeah, but
Wow.
there's no one else that I've kept in touch with other than my fellow volunteers that were in
Mhm.
my group. I'm very close with my roommate, who was my roommate in the Peace Corps. I'm very close with her. I talk to her almost daily.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty intense connection
Mm-hmm.
to stick to it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, I want to get into some of what you do because it's so important, and I love this different um, use of the StrengthsFinder tool that you are really exploring with your clients that I think is just invaluable. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to tell us what you do without telling us what you do by sharing a story about one of your clients. Obviously, no names, no
Mm-hmm.
identifying details, but something about an experience that you had with a client where the client walked away with something valuable and you walked away feeling confirmation because again, this is a unique way of using that tool. You and I have,
Mm-hmm.
I think, a different way of using the tool than most StrengthsFinder coaches that I've experienced. So,
Mm-hmm. I shouldn't share her name or any identifying
no,
information about the client. So can I call her K as an initial?
perfect. That's perfect.
So Kay came to me struggling with on again, off again drinking and over drinking and being able to quit for a little while but then always kind of going back to it and not being someone who had a rock bottom moment as people are kind of familiar with. She didn't have that. She was kind of a classic gray area drinker. Was somewhere in that space between, rock bottom and every now and then drinking. But she would quit for a while and then kind of fall back into old patterns. And she came to me with seeking coaching. I'm trying to not tell what I do, but tell the story of the clients. She came to me for some coaching in how she can leverage her natural talents into helping her solve this kind of merry-go-round that she was on with her drinking habits. And I'm proud and pleased to say that she's, as of, I think, last week, she's now 7 months alcohol-free.
Wow.
She's completely transformed her relationship with alcohol. She has dived into her strengths. she's gotten a new job in the whole midst of quitting drinking and understanding what her real strengths are. She's thriving, and I'm just like ecstatic of the progress that she's made. I've been working with her since May, and it's now December of 24. So just about seven. She just had her 7 month soberversary.
So tell me about a recent experience, like a conversation that you realized, oh my gosh, this is it. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Oh, just seeing her we meet every 2 weeks, and seeing her show up just vibrant and smiling and thriving in her new job. Um, and just so proud of herself that she's knocked the alcohol thing and she's not thinking about drinking. She's just thrilled with her own progress. And every time I have a session
Has
with
she
her,
told you a story?
hmm,
I'll give you a quick example. There
okay.
was, I did a workshop with a group of managers and owners of residential facilities for people recovering from addiction. And I did this workshop on storytelling. And one of the participants said after the event to the guy that organized it that he never thought about himself as a storyteller and suddenly understood how important it was to share a story to connect with the person that he's trying to serve. And of those moments where I thought, oh, that's it was just this huge confirmation that the work that I am doing is meaningful and making a difference in ripple effect that I can't possibly see.
Yeah, I think maybe the story I would share is the strengths-based approach to going alcohol free. So I had been working with her for several months before she landed this interview that she was called back for second and third interviews. And during one of the last interviews, the company mentioned to her that they do Clifton Strengths as part of their company culture. And I had already done her strengths with her. So she was able to bring that into the interview. And she said, I know my strength. Here's my top 5. And she knew them so perfectly right off the top of her head. And that was because of my coaching with her. And she landed the job, and the job is a perfect fit for her. So that just made me feel like, wow, this is such an insightful tool that people so deeply resonate with. And it landed her the job in addition to helping her quit drinking. It just gave her so much insight into herself that was the moment I was like, yes, we're doing some really good work here.
Yes, that's exactly the story I was hoping to hear. That is so perfect that in the interview, she was able to bring that forward and say, here are my strengths and here's how I use them.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little chill up my spine because if every person had that knowledge to be able to present what they're good at and why they're good at it, then they don't have this strengths finder language. I don't have to say, I have command of my top talents. I can just tell a story about the chaotic atmosphere I walked into and what I did to reduce that chaos and bring order out of it. I don't have to say, I have command, right?
Exactly.
So for her to be able to do that is just life-changing.
Yeah, it was really brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it landed her this new job, and she's a perfect fit for it, and she loves it. She's really thriving and is just so grateful.
I love that, because what you're also telling me is that I'm using StrengthsFinder not just for the sobriety, but so that she understands how to practically use those talents, that she could even apply for a job that she knows she's a good fit for based on what the activities are that are expected of her in that role.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people get short-sighted in seeing the tool for, oh, well, this only applies at work, or it only applies in certain areas of, at work I'm this way, at home I'm this way. And your strengths apply to every part of your life. And there is no separation. Kind of what you started this podcast with is that separation of personal and professional. Our strengths are just our natural way of being. And when you really know what that language and the framework and then can apply it, that's where, I mean, it's can be life-changing.
I would love to hear a story of yours when you used your strengths, when you realized, oh, I this is the tool I need to use in this situation versus one of the other talents in your top.
Yeah, I would love to share a story of when I quit drinking, actually. Because it wasn't until probably maybe a month or two in, that I realized I was using my talents. And this was where the insight came from of, oh, this is my instinct. My instinct is to use these talents. And that's how like profound Clifton Strengths is. Um, the first program that I did was a 21-day challenge that had a learning component to it. It was an email that you got every day that just had some tip or tool or some insight about what alcohol does to your brain and whatever it was, there was a learning component. So for 21 days in a row, you got this email that you can read and kind of digest. I did it with this group of women who then said, well, let's do dry January together, because this was in December of 21. And then January of 22, there was a different program that someone had found. And it was another learning program. This one had video lessons to
You're
do
such a
every
learner.
day. I know. So name my strength without me telling you what strength I have. It was video lessons. It was interesting content. And like I said, it wasn't probably until the next month later, I was like, oh, that was my learner and my input. So I have learner number 1, input number 4. My input was just soaking up every bit of knowledge I could find. And I learned so much in those first couple of months that I then went to podcasts and to books, and I continued my learning just on my own. But those first 2 months were so critical for my learning process. And like I said, I didn't like deliberately use my learner. It just came naturally to me. And once I have a saying that you may have heard before of like, once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. You can't unlearn what you've learned, right? So, in all of that learning that I did over the first couple months, I was like, wow, there's like no reason to go back and drink anymore. It just didn't make any sense at all. And the mental clarity that I was starting to experience and the creativity was coming back, and I just wasn't, fuzzy. I wasn't a super like heavy. I was also a gray area drinker. So, but it just cleared up like all of my mental thought processes. And I'm also high in strategic thinking. So my strategic thinking themes just came back alive when I quit drinking. And
In what way?
they like the creativity came back, just the clarity of not ever feeling fuzzy.
That is a
And not,
strategic
and I
thing,
don't,
isn't it?
yeah, I don't mean fuzzy like hungover, because I didn't get hungover very often, but even just like a little bit of alcohol can impact your sleep. One glass of alcohol can impact your sleep. It does impact your sleep. So even just not waking up feeling rested, that's what I mean by like a little bit fuzzy. All that went away. And it was like, oh, wow, this is like a fog has totally lifted, and getting good sleep and just that clarity of all of my strategic thinking themes just came back out.
So, for our listeners, what are your top 5 let's give 6. What are your top 6 talents?
So learner is number 1, achiever, responsibility, input, futuristic, intellection.
Okay. So for our listeners, you probably understand what learner is. It is somebody who is motivated to learn. And the first thing they do when they have a project is learn. They pull all the information from all over the place that they can. And then you add that intellection, which is number 6. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
In your talents. And that's the part of Sally that she needs to take a deep dive. It's not just learning a variety of things, it's learning one thing deeply. And that's what the intellection is. And for our listeners, how did you start using your achiever also to contribute to this choice to live differently?
So achiever is all about setting goals and working really hard toward a goal. It had an initial goal of 21 days. So that was how I first started, was like, well, I should probably maybe take a break, maybe take a look at this drinking thing and take a break from alcohol for a little bit. And so I did a 21-day program at first, and that was the initial goal. The next goal became dry January, and that was a 30-day goal or 31-day goal. So I think having like mini milestones like that were super important. And that's what I coach people on now, is using one of those tactics, like having a mini milestone, go for 2 weeks or a month, 60 days, 90 days, set a small but manageable goal. And that's much more doable than saying, oh, I'm quitting drinking. That can seem really overwhelming to people.
So you knew how to coach yourself because you know your own talents. I remember a moment when I was floundering at my desk, just like scrolling through LinkedIn, feeling like I was unproductive and couldn't figure out what was going wrong. And then I looked up at my strengths and realized, oh, Sarah, your activator is turned up to 11.
Oh,
what is a better tool that you could use right now? And I thought, oh, well, strategic's my number one talent. So, and then I have ideation. So what ideas can I come up with that will get me from point A to point B the fastest? And so I gave myself some tasks to complete in 20 minutes so I could feed all of those talents. I know how to do that for myself, and I've learned how to do this for others who have different talents from mine. So when you work with a person with different talents from yours, can you give me an example, maybe about this woman that you're working with that is 7 months sober, or somebody else that might have significantly different talents from you? What are the different strategies you come up with that client to meet their strengths?
Yeah, I can give you a good example of someone with high relationship building themes. Since I'm in my top 10, I'm mostly strategic thinking and executing, which if someone has high relationship building themes, there are themes like adaptability, empathy, connectedness, harmony, positivity, those themes in the relationship building bracket. And I would always recommend someone like this client that I was just referring to, which it was the case for her, to dive into something where you can build relationships with other people who are on a similar path than you, other people who are maybe struggling with their drinking, or other people who are, on that merry-go-round of on again, off again. Find a connection with a group that you can build relationships with that group. And whether it's an online community, there are so many communities out there that have supportive people in them. And when you can build relationships with those kinds of people, that's what can really help, is just building those connections. So for someone with, high relationship building themes, I have got a list on my website of some really great communities that are out there, and they're Facebook oriented, or, they're online communities. And I don't know if this is the place to bring this in or not, but I did not go to an AA meeting, and I don't necessarily support that modality for a variety of reasons, but there are so many other options out there that I think people just don't know about. And if you just did a Google search on alcohol-free support groups, or something like that, you get the Sober Club, you get TLC is the luckiest club. You get a whole variety of online types of support groups that can really make a big difference. Just having, even if you just want to lurk, you can see what other people are posting and see the responses and just the support that you can get.
I love that. Partly because sometimes you have to lurk for a while. There are certain talents that they're going to lurk for a while before they dip their toe in. Because, like you, they need to collect a lot of information before they're going to take action.
Yeah,
I love that. It's especially meaningful. I love this idea of with relationship building talents that what you really need is think about what you do. I heard this from I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but I'll include a link in my show notes. Peter, I'll think of it later. He suggested that we have a vision statement, a story vision statement. And so in your case, it might be that your client, this woman that you've been talking about, your client continues to live a life full of satisfaction and sobriety, satisfaction relationships at work, or something like that, but on a bigger scale, like with more of the people that you work with or communities that you end up working with. So if you think about that, what does the world look like when you have been successful?
Wow. And what does the world look like when I have been successful?
In the work you do?
I think that that there's more people who are thriving alcohol free and have gotten the support that they need than what's out there today. I think a lot of people really struggle, and they struggle alone, especially in the gray area drinking world that you don't, it's, and what I mean by gray area drinking is it's not the rock bottom, but it's not every now and then drinking. It's in that gray area in between somewhere. And I had never heard of that term, first of all, when I first started my journey to investigate or to look at my relationship with alcohol. I had never even heard of that as a term. And that was eye-opening to me, that I was like, oh, that's a term that I resonate with. Yes, I can quit for a little while and then I usually go back to it. And I think more people, what the world would look like is more people get the support that they need and know that there's other options out there. And that they get the help that they need, because there's no need to be using alcohol in a way that negatively impacts your life.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I hear that it's a nice vision, and I can see it working because I know that your work is having big ripple effects on communities, just starting with one individual at a time. So how do our listeners get in touch with you? What potential clients who would consider working, what would that look like?
What would that look like if there were listeners who would be interested in working with me?
Yes.
So I run 2 different programs. I run a one-on-one coaching. My signature coaching program is called Reach New Heights. And I designed it so it's a 6-month transformation process. It's more for the sober serious, I like to call it. People who really want to dive deeply into their relationship with alcohol and most likely are on a sobriety track. And it's a 6-month program. It's one-to-one coaching. It's a pretty intense kind of deep dive into all the reasons you drank in the first place and changing some limiting beliefs, and obviously doing Clifton Strengths as part of it, doing a values exercise. It's 100% positive psychology based approach. So that's the one-on-one coaching program. And then I run a 31-day alcohol-free challenge which I mentioned a couple of the challenges that I did in my own journey. I have since become an accredited sobriety coach. So I've gone through the sobriety coach training myself and have pulled bits and pieces out of the couple of programs that I did as I was learning, and then with my sobriety coach training, and put together a 31-day course that's a video lesson based plus weekly group calls. And I only run it probably 3 or 4 times a year. The next one, it would be coming up for dry January of 25. Sober October is a popular month. Dry July is another one. And so I run that, like I said, 3, 4 times a year. It's a month-long alcohol-free challenge and group coaching course. And I'm at MageeCoaching.com. And you mentioned my full name is Sally Magee, and I'm pretty easy to find, Magee coaching.com.
That's excellent. And listeners, don't worry about pausing this and writing things down. All of her links will be in the show notes associated with this podcast episode at elkinsconsulting.com. So, Sally, to leave our listeners with a comment, a guidance, something that you would want people to hear directly from you, what would be your message to our listeners?
What would be my message? Start small. If you're interested in looking at your relationship with alcohol, know your strengths, because they can tell you a lot of insights into how you might go about doing it, whether you're a learner and would love a learning program, achiever just needs a goal to check off, or any of the other 34 talents. I actually have a guide on my website that gives you an action step for all 34 talents. So your listeners can also download that if they're interested. But start small. I always recommend start with a month-long challenge and see how you do, see how you feel. And from there, maybe extend it to 45, 60 days. You don't need to make a lifetime commitment. Just start with a small experiment.
That makes so much sense to me. And especially because in the age of social media, so many times we make these grand statements on social media and then feel beholden to them. And then it just feels like a resentment, and you're not doing it for the right reasons. And as you talk about using your strengths to accomplish this, to change a dynamic that is unhealthy, that is wreaking havoc in different aspects of your life, being able to do it for that reason and not because you said you were going to do it on social media. I love that. Taking small steps and not necessarily making grand announcements.
Yeah, there's no reason to make a grand declaration. The other thing I always recommend to people, if I could leave a second kind of tip or message, is to get really clear on your why. And why are you doing a challenge or going after this goal in the first place? So you've got real motivation to remember and stay focused on, because the early days are hard, no doubt. And just to be really focused on whatever that goal is, and diving deeply into that why. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing the work? Because it is work. But being really clear on your why can be helpful.
Yeah. And I bet that you can contribute greatly in helping somebody identify the why based on their talents.
Absolutely. Yep. Exactly.
I love that. I love that you're using this tool in this way. It's so meaningful. I know so many people that can benefit from this. So thank you, Sally. Thank you for bringing this to my attention and to our listeners today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's been such a pleasure.
It has been. Listeners, now it's your turn. It doesn't have to be about sobriety necessarily, but a big goal in terms of redefining what you want out of life and how you're going to get it. Using your natural talents to, first of all, identify what that why is. Why do you want to make a change? And then using your talents to really be successful in making a significant change in your life. I'm really curious, what will be your big change? What is the transformation you're seeking? Is it to be sober? Is it to lose weight? Is it to start your own business? I'm so curious. So please leave a comment on the show notes on my website at elkinsconsulting.com, or simply email me. And Sally and I will respond to whatever message you send. Thanks so much for listening. Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.